Morning.
Morning, everyone.
Okay, and we're live. Thanks everyone for attending. We're here for our entrepreneur education session as part of our sector summits. And today we are really in for a treat. We got our life science regulatory pathway experts, API, Applied Pharmaceutical Innovation, is going to, and their team, they're big, a good team of people here, are going to lead us up. Now, API is our lead organizing partner and presenting partner for the Life Sciences Summit. And Paramita is our co-lead. So Paramita, why don't you, I'll let you take it away and introduce yourself. If anyone has any questions before we get going, please throw your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll, our moderator will help you come off mute and ask your question. So Paramita, over to you.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Hello, everybody. This is a real treat to be here. I'm Paramita, the Director of Programs and Ecosystem Development for Applied Pharmaceutical Innovation, a national not-for-profit, which is headquartered here in Edmonton, but we do work across Canada. Today's Entrepreneur Education Series is something that we have been really looking forward to. And at this moment, I am going to invite Richard Roy and Michael Gurgis, our subject matter experts on the regulatory pathway and clinical trials, to introduce themselves. And they are going to be the ones who will take it away. Richard, over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. I will I'll share my screen. Get this up.
Did you want to do a quick intro, Richard?
Correct,
and Michael?
yes. Correct, yes.
Awesome.
So let's do this. Let's do this. And let's do this. So thank you for having me. So my name is Richard Roy, and I oversee the product development and scale-up activities here at API. So what that involves is everything from early stage scientific discovery work through the drug discovery pathway into preclinical work, in vitro work, into in vivo animal studies, all the way through to clinical trials, and then all the way through to new drug submissions on the regulatory side to try to get a drug approved for the market. So our team, tries to support basically everywhere we can in that life cycle, and we'll be talking about that today in this session. So thanks for having me, Michael.
I'm Michael Gurgis. I am the Director of Clinical Pharmacology of Data Services. So really our group is responsible for supporting pharmacokinetics, PK/PD, and the data analysis and biostatistics associated with a variety of different products and clients.
So for today's presentation, it is a big topic, as you can imagine. Regulatory strategy is such an important aspect of this industry and your product development lifecycle. We had to kind of keep it to a certain amount of slides and a certain amount of minutes. So we're going to be presenting, this is our outline for today. We're just going to talk a little bit about API's role in the ecosystem and what we can do to partner and collaborate and help you in your journey. We're also going to talk a bit about the high levels on the regulatory and quality pathways that you take to get a drug approved in the market in Canada. Now, our focus will be on small molecule drugs in Canada. And the reason for that is just because there's so many different types of life sciences products out there, and there's so many different iterations and paths you can take, whether FDA, Health Canada, EU, right? So we're going to focus on Health Canada, but of course, there is a lot of similarities or parallels between the regulatory pathways for different countries. We're also going to talk, which is a little bit more from our learnings, is around what we call de-risking activities. So with that, we'll talk about some specific points where you can de-risk in your journey to look at more a higher success rate in your drug development process. So first off, we'll start with the role of applied pharmaceutical innovation. So basically, we are a support organization that supports startups and innovators in the life sciences field. We have our subject matter experts and our extensive network, and basically we aim to be the collaborator of choice when it comes to your drug development product journey. And I say the journey because it is, I'll go into what those steps are a little bit in one of the slides, but you'll see from start to finish, it is a long journey and a lot of detail and time and commitment that goes into this process. So, when you're looking at, when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, you want to know what kind of goes from here to here. It's not a simple question, right? There's a lot to it, but we'll talk a little bit high level about that today. And hopefully give you some, some good information for that journey, or if you're already in that journey, you can understand what's coming for you in the future. So what we try to do is we try to support in all phases of this life cycle, including around the chemistry and bioanalytics for your novel and lead compounds, in vitro GLP lab services and clinical pharmacology and biostats work. We do actually have the capacity to do GMP small scale production lots for in vitro and in vivo work for up to, like, for example, early phase clinical trials. We do provide regulatory guidance, through the different phases of the regulatory pathway, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And really one of the key terms you'll hear in this industry also is risks, identifying risks, specifically around safety and efficacy, and mitigating those where possible, which will help, overall. I think the goal is to lower the attrition rates for your lead compounds. I'm sure you probably heard that, X number of compounds that get, into the pipeline don't make it through, right? So, the stronger your, all these different things that we're going to be talking about today, you do, the better chance that your lead candidate will succeed. So just a bit of a flow chart of kind of the major sections of a drug regulatory submission. I won't go into everything in super detail, but you can obviously get a hold of me after if you want to know any more specifics about the sections. But really, you start with the drug discovery, and that's where you're looking at your lead compounds. You're looking at your indications, what the product is showing promise in doing. You go into your preclinical work. You go into the bioanalytics. You go into your toxicology, all those type of tests. Then you go into your clinical, which would be your human phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So you can kind of see on the left the blocks on the left talk about kind of where you start, as an innovator. Then you go into phase 1, clinical trials, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, which will be post-market. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because the maturity of the product, the process, and the data you have to support the product gets kind of, it evolves, which means it gets stricter as you go down that path, right? So from phase 1 to phase 3, it's a lot stricter. And then, of course, once you have a commercial product into phase 4, then, of course, you're meeting the full GMPs. Everything is, you have an NOC from Health Canada, and I'll go over that in a little bit of detail. But this is a good schematic to show you kind of what those steps are. So once you've done your clinical, you have some good data there. Then you move into your regulatory submission, the new drug submission, which I'll talk about, and then into commercialization. So once you do have that approval and you go into commercialization, then you enter into the launch mode of your product, and then the post-market work, which can include adverse event reporting, complaints, or anything like that, just to ensure that the safety and efficacy of your product is still being met out in the field. Some of the key considerations as you're doing your drug development process is, I just kind of made some, I'll call them like the highlight aspects here, is understanding the indication, looking at the safety risks of the product, looking at the efficacy risks of the product. So that's things like toxicology, PD, PK, all those things come into play. Patient factors, like what patient population is this intended for? The dose strategy, the dose concentrations, where you're trying to, have the product administered in the body, and how that it will work in the body. And that's where a dosage form and release comes into play as well. Is it a capsule? Is it an injectable? Those type of questions are all kind of being looked at as you're figuring out your product formulation and looking at, how you can get the efficacy and safety that you need for the product. The other thing is stability. Of course, you have to ensure that your drug substance and your drug product is going to be stable for a period of time, so that or your patients have the assurance that the product will be stable. And those studies are, quite intensive in terms of, they could be multi-years if you want to put like a long shelf life on your product. Then things like instructions for use. How easy will it be for is it a healthcare practitioner administering it, or will it be the patient themselves? And then things like primary packaging. Is it a blister pack? Is it a bottle? Is it a bag? These are all kind of considerations that go into your design as you go through these different steps to get regulatory approval. So just talking at a high level regulatory pathway. So we talked about the first kind of steps: drug discovery, preclinical, and clinical. So then you move into two parallel paths, and these are kind of two high level things I'll talk about. But the number one is the new drug submission. So that's the term in Canada, NDS. This is required for you to get approval for your drug in Canada. And what happens there is you provide, and I'll go into the details of this in another slide, but you provide the safety and efficacy data to Health Canada, and provided everything is good there, then you get issued what they call a notice of compliance and a DIN, a drug identification number. and that will show that you've successfully submitted enough information that they feel the product is safe and effective and the risks are mitigated so that you can launch the product in Canada. Now, typically the time frame to receive approval on this is about 1 to 2 years. That's a typical time frame you see for an NDS submission. The other parallel activity, which isn't talked as much on the regulatory side, but it's very important, is what they call the drug establishment licenses. So this process oversees any of the sites that are involved in what they call the licensable activities, and I'll define those in a second, involved in your drug manufacturing process. And the reason for this is to ensure that the products themselves are being manufactured to the quality they need to be, because that also links to the safety, right? So now you've proven to Health Canada it's a safe and effective drug through the NDS, but how do you make sure that it's manufactured consistently and be safe with the manufacturing process, right? So these two processes, the new drug submission and the drug establishment license amendments, are so critical to your commercialization pathway. The standard service timeline from Health Canada is 250 days for a DEL amendment. So keep those in mind, obviously, when you're looking at the timing of when the new drug submission goes in and when your DEL submissions go in. And there's actually a requirement within the NDS to indicate that you're submitting the DEL amendment, because they want to see which sites are going to be involved in your manufacturing of your product. So in both cases, you want to avoid any delays. There's a couple of terms they use called pause or stop the clock. This could be through clarification requests, a notice of deficiencies, or outright rejections if they're not happy with the content. So you want to avoid those and make sure your submissions go through and obviously be as effective in this timelines we're talking about as possible. So just briefly, I won't go into the specifics of each section because it's a lot of detail, but content of an NDS includes 5 modules. This is generated from what they call the CTD, the Common Technical Document. So module 1 is more kind of the administrative application work, like the application forms and whatnot. Module 2 is more around a summary, kind of what they call a quas and whatnot, where you're talking about the summary of the quality, clinical, non-clinical data. Module 3, also sometimes called CMC, includes the details on the drug substance and drug product, such as the manufacturing process, the sites that are involved in the manufacturing, testing results, whether it's kind of initial structure testing, all the way to things like impurity profiles, strength, make sure you have the right strength of the product, so through assays, what packaging you're using, and as I mentioned earlier, stability, because they want to make sure that, of course, everything has been shown passing, obviously, and you don't have any impurities or anything there that would be unsafe for the patient. Now, module 4 is that contains the non-clinical content. So that's your pharmacological and toxicological aspects of the API, as well as the finished dose, the drug product, which could be a capsule as an example. And then module 5 goes into the clinical data. Of course, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that you go into the phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, depending on the product, of course. But that provides the data, small population to a larger population, and you saw what those the effectiveness of your drug was, and if there was any safety or adverse events that happened during those trials. A good document to refer to in this one is the Management of Drug Submissions and Applications by Health Canada. So the other aspect I was talking about was the drug establishment license itself. So basically, this is to ensure that the sites involved in licensable activities are following the Health Canada GMPs or equivalents. If you are having the product manufactured in Canada, the site manufacturing it does need to have a DEL. If it is a foreign company, then you have to have basically that site on what they call an importer's DEL to show that the GMP evidence review has been done. So it's very important that all sites involved in licensable activity are on a drug establishment license and have their GMP evidence approved. What are those licensable activities? Well, they include the actual fabrication of the product, the packaging and labeling of the product, the testing of the product. This includes both API and the drug product, and making sure that, obviously the product meets specification each time it's manufactured. And then the other ones that are kind of more related to the commercialization and bringing it to the country are importation, distribution, and wholesale. Those are 3 other important roles that you're required to have a drug establishment license. So when you are figuring out, how you're going to get the product to market and what, collaborations you need to have, what partners you need to work with, these are some of the considerations as you're looking at who's going to be involved in your product as you go commercial. Just a side note on the GMP evidence, they do review the evidence related to what activity that site will be doing and what type of product. So if it's a powder, if it's a small molecule, Health Canada will do their evaluation of the GMP evidence accordingly based off of the type of product. So two really valuable guidances for this would be the guidance on drug establishment licenses, Guide 2, and then also, as I was talking about foreign sites, how to demonstrate foreign building compliance with the GMPs, Guide 80 is also a very powerful guideline you can use for that aspect. So the other part, we talk about, of course, is when you're developing your drug product, you're going through kind of a manufacturing evolution as well. And when I say evolution or scale up, it's basically looking at, you're making small scale, then you're moving up to clinical trials, so a bit larger scale. And then, of course, you're going to eventually move to your commercial quantities. And of course, you're looking at, what the market's going to be, how much you're going to need. So throughout these different steps, you want to make sure, that you're manufacturing the product and the process is defined for scalability. The other aspect of it is, are you going to be doing it yourself? So companies do need to make the decision, like, is this something that we can take on ourselves? Or is this something we need to partner up or have a CMO, for example, a contract manufacturing organization, support this? So that decision is a major one. Some companies might do the small scale, but once they get larger and need the higher quantities, they'll move to a CMO as an example. But that's really going to be a question and a consideration that the companies make. During the clinical trials, again, you do have, because it is going to humans, you do have to meet a level of GMP compliance. And then, of course, for commercial manufacturing, full GMP compliance is required. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the full DEL requirements be in place for that. The key guideline for that one would be the main GMPs in Canada, which would be Guide 1. So now I'll pass it on to Michael, who will talk more about the de-risking activities related to some of the the sections I just talked about within that NDS and DEL process.
Thanks, Richard. So de-risking is basically this concept of trying to do as much as you can, really in planning ahead to reduce the risk associated with making some of the decisions that you're going to have to be doing in the development and regulatory pathway. So there we're going to be talking about marketing, regulatory, preclinical work, and manufacturing partner. So we'll go to the next slide. When we talk about marketing, I think a lot of time understanding the market, and I emphasize here, it's a little more than knowing just who the competitor products are in the marketplace. You need to really understand that with drug marketing or drug presence in the marketplace, there's a lot of discussions about how this product is going to be paid for, especially in Canada, when we're looking at a market where a significant portion of drug purchases is actually done by the non-private sector. Public payers, institutional payers, be it hospitals or government or federal government, are some of the major buyers of your product. And some of those decisions are not very, transparent, and they're not really, you have to understand what are the motivating factors for how or why they're going to be paying for a product. So once a drug is approved by Health Canada, for the most part, really the only one paying for it at that point would be the private insurance or patients paying out of pocket. Really, the vast majority of the payers actually wait for the drug, Canadian Drug Review Process, CDR, and CADTH to actually do a review of the drug product, which they're focusing really on cost effectiveness of the product based on what is currently in the marketplace. So they'll compare to genericized products to basically whatever else is able to enter in comparison to the therapeutic area. So often brands are automatically, a new entry are automatically at a disadvantage if there is an existing standard of care that is rather inexpensive. So there's the bar to get reimbursement right off the bat is now increased. And once CDR has reviewed and provided a recommendation, then that has to go to all the provincial payers and all the hospitals to review and either agree to this recommendation or revise it or update it. But really, the next step is in parallel to that is what they call the Pan-Canadian review process, which is actually a secret negotiation between payers and manufacturers around what the price that institutional payers are willing to pay. Those prices are not published, they're not transparent, and those negotiations are often very can be long-winded depending on the risks associated with the approval of the product as deemed by the provincial and institutional payers. So that can take on a year or two before, again, you get on any formulary or get approved by any institutional payer. So it's a long process to get on there. So really, you have to understand what the marketplace looks like. How did your competitor get in? How was their CDR review? Those documents are public, so the CDR review for a product and the weaknesses that they have identified, the review of the cost effectiveness model, the review of the pharmacoeconomic model is publicly available. So understanding the marketplace and the players that work in there is important. And some would say, well, maybe you need to wait. I can tell you that designing your clinical studies, phase 1 to phase 3, should be done with an understanding of what payers want and what they're willing to. So this is basically can look at comparing between a placebo-controlled trial versus an active control, and what is an appropriate comparator for your product. And this surveillance can provide you some insight on that. Next slide. Yeah. So this is also, it's not, I work with a lot of industry folks historically where the sponsor is uncomfortable asking regulators questions. They feel that if they ask questions, then they get pigeonholed into a specific regulatory pathway. But in reality, asking questions from the FDA or Health Canada about your program early on is actually a very good and clear thing. You have to understand they have seen all the other products. They know where you're going and potentially what adverse events or potentially what struggles are you going to be seeing in the future. Because they've seen similar compounds already and they've reviewed similar compounds already. So often they will invariably try to guide you in the best course of action. Both regulators intuitively aren't in the business of stopping submissions. They're in the business of facilitating submissions. They want you to be successful. That's really their business, and that's how they are reviewed, is how successfully they are accepting submissions. So they want to give you the right answers as quickly as possible and facilitate the process. And they also want to tell you when you're going off in the wrong direction. Just because the regulator doesn't think you should go that way, often vendors say, oh, well, I will go that way. They don't know what they're doing. It's actually very, if you're going in a totally opposite direction to what they're recommending, especially if both of them are consistently giving the same message, it's a signal that you probably shouldn't be going that way. It's important. They will tell you about the practicalities of the review process, the timelines, and what needs to be done, and the ensuring all the manufacturing and CMC process is done properly. They're a very good source of information. As well, there's a lot of information that's publicly available. Place of therapy indication, how the indication is written, what has been approved by the FDA, the Europeans, or Health Canada. It sits right in the product monograph. That is a wealth of information that's available. So understanding what your competitors and what the other players in the marketplace, what indications they have, trying to understand what off-label use is currently occurring for a product, because that allows you to enter into that potentially trying indication for the off-label use that the other competitor has not obtained. So product labeling with regards to specific populations is very important, and understanding that. So doing that all ahead of time is actually a very cost-effective way and helps you manage your submission and manage your decisions. Next slide. So this one, of course, is closer to my heart with regards to in silico. Often we have a lot of conversations about animal studies. Animal studies are very expensive. They're increasingly become more and more expensive. And often, though, we can get a lot of answers that traditionally were done from animal studies through in silico and modeling projects where we can use the chemical characteristics, the historical understanding of the compound, solubility, permeability, to simulate and to determine how this product is going to look like in small animals and in humans, predicting the pharmacokinetics, predicting the understanding. And this process is really great for helping you design your phase 1 study. These simulations can be done with active controls so that you're comparing yourself to either multiple candidates or comparing yourself to the competitor to figure out where you are with regards to pharmacokinetic characteristics, dosing potential, how frequently you're going to need to be dosing the product. And these are all very important marketing decisions. So this can all be done outside of animal studies in this in silico model. And then once you have done that, a good solid in silico and in vitro understanding, then you're going to go into the animal studies with a very solid set of information. And then animal studies become confirmatory rather than exploratory, because you don't want to do an animal study and then find out it's failed because your product isn't absorbing. You could predict that using in silico models. Okay, next, where are we here? Yeah, so manufacturing, we often talk about manufacturing being one of the most forgotten things when we're talking about drug development. People talk about identifying a compound and basically getting its pharmacological characteristics and doing. There's a lot of interesting about finding the right compound and its efficacy, but not a lot is discussed about, well, okay, so now you've found this molecule, how are you going to manufacture it? How difficult is the manufacturing process? How expensive is it? Where can it be manufactured? What's the stability, as Richard were talking about? How stable is the product? What the formulation is going to look like? And is this product, is the cost of it going to be so exorbitant that you don't have a place in the marketplace? So it's the manufacturing can actually play a significant role in understanding where you're going to go. And can you, I've been in conversations where we have a semi-effective compound, but understanding the manufacturing, the costs associated with it and the formulation, then we'd realize that, no, we can't really develop this product because we can't compete in the marketplace with the established, because the price point for manufacturing and moving forward is not there. So this can be so understanding this really far ahead and monitoring as you scale up is important, and having a partner that is GMP and able to support you as you move from preclinical, clinical stock to scale up and to commercialization. So next, I think, what do I got? Yeah, we got a question. That's it. I think I'm done.
Excellent. That it was wonderful. There have been a couple of questions which have come up in the chat. So Adrian asks, one question is if we could touch on any material differences between the requirements for drugs, medical devices, software as a medical device, and alternative therapeutic products. Are there have to be differences, but can we have a discussion on what are differences versus some of the similarities as well? Because I would assume that efficacy and safety are things which apply not only to drugs, but to everything.
Yeah, and if I could just clarify, I'm looking for kind of the big differences here, because I know there are going to be lots of smaller ones. But
Yeah.
I know that ATPs specifically are very new, so if you could
Mhm.
also touch on that to some degree, that'd be great.
So Michael, I'll cover some of it, and you cover some of it.
So when we're talking about ATPs, we're talking about sort of like things that may have originated as natural products and then move on into is that what we're?
I think on the Health Canada webpage, the definition of ATP is something like the intersection of medical device and therapeutic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very loose and almost like they're still developing those rules. And I was just wondering if you guys had some experience with any ATPs yet, because it sounds like that's kind of the newest thing coming on Health Canada. Because they don't describe it very much on the webpage. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so sort of like yeah. Are they a device? Are they? We have consulted on a couple of I'll just call them products where it's an app or maybe linked up to a device that is being used in therapy. What's interesting is that historically, some of the regulators have really, been a bit, as you said, they're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. But increasingly, recently, what we're hearing is that one of the things that they want to actually capture, which is adverse events. So, it's one thing to have an app that is part of therapy. Be it mental health therapy or exercise, whatever, and the regulator says, okay, well, you need to capture safety information on the use of this device slash app, and of course that is kind of difficult because, well, what is it isn't like a normal drug you take if people get headaches and you capture that as an adverse event, or if they have a nosebleed. This is a bit, what is an adverse event associated with using an app, twice a day or 3 times a day? Like what are we capturing? And what are the if the app stops working for a day, and something happens to the patient, to the person how'd you capture that adverse event? So those are questions yet to be determined, I think.
So just to add to that, thank you, Michael. So obviously, when you look at the one of the terms you'll hear in the past is a combination product, right? Like, is it a drug? Is it a medical device? Is it a combination? And and depending on which category it falls into, the regulatory pathway does change, right? So when we talk about a drug going through a new drug submission, a medical device goes through a medical device license application for class 2 and above. So that it's based on, again, as we talk about risk, we talk about safety, we talk about efficacy, we talk about clinical data. So the parallels would be, you are going to be providing evidence to the regulator like Health Canada. But if it is a medical device, then it'll be reviewed by a different, department of Health Canada, looking at different information through the licensing process versus the new drug submission. And then the classification of risk, from class 1 being a low risk device all the way up to class 4 being high risk device. So it's where the product and what the product, medical device or software as a device, whatever it is being used at, and where that kind of fits in. So you're right, it is a kind of an evolving area, and Health Canada is still trying to figure out how to regulate certain things like that fall into those type of areas. Obviously, regulations for NHPs are different as well. Cannabis products are different as well, right? So it's quite interesting to see how they're evolving the regulatory scheme as these new types of products or therapies come out. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that. But in the past, it's been if it's a drug, it goes through the NDS. If it's a medical device, it goes through the medical device listing process, licensing process, right? So those are kind of the high level. And then within that, there's also the quality system requirements. So for example, if you remember in the presentation, I talked about Guide 1, the Health Canada GMPs. If you're going to be doing the medical device side, now you're talking about ISO 13485 and the MDSAP program, specifically including the Canadian medical device regulations. So again, you're looking at even which are the core regulations and core quality system you need to have to support the quality expectations for manufacturing that product.
So yeah, just to add so we know historically we've had situations where in the use of pharmacogenomic testing as part of a drug submission and a drug indication, where, for example, a targeted drug product that requires a patient have a positive result from an assay, a genetic assay, to determine that, they have the specific mutation, which allows there's a few cystic fibrosis drugs that follow that paradigm. And in that case, basically the assay is approved and developed at the same time as the product, so that you have to use this specific assay, an assay kit or vendor, in order to have those. And when they develop them, often they're using, as Richard said, you're following, the standard assay development process, but it's happening in parallel to the drug development process.
Does that answer your question, Adrian?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to be watching it to see how this evolves.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of risk with this type of approach of developing those products, is because another example would be like some of the biologics that come in a pen or something, where there's a device that is patented separately than the drug, but they're connected together, right? Like
there is a
inhalers.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a question actually about devices. So Rita was asking if API specializes in areas of medical devices, class 2, 3, etc.
I guess it depends on the capacity of that support. For example, ISO 13485 quality system, building, or CFR Part 820 for that matter, if you're going to the US, or supporting, the MDSAP program. We can help with that consulting. We can help with the licensing process as well. Depending if it is, a class 1 is a establishment license, but a class 2, 3, and 4 do require the license application. And of course, the information you need to provide does vary depending on the risk of the product. So we can also support pulling together those, different submission types, so different levels of risk. And then on top of that, there's also things like, let's say, labeling. What are the labeling requirements in Canada? What do you need to say on a box? Type of thing. So we can help develop all those things. If you have questions around like what does it, the interpretation of the regulation around this, around that type of thing, right? So we can definitely support that. We don't currently do, this side note, we don't currently do any manufacturing under specifically ISO 13485. So that has been an interesting question I've received recently that we're going to be looking into. But, because when you're talking about manufacturing drugs under the GMPs, it is different than manufacturing medical devices under 13485 or CFR Part 820 as an example.
From biostats, and we definitely support analysis of studies around devices with regards to biostatistics and data support and analysis. So we can do that.
Perfect. And in the website, so in the chat, Marina has put in our website. So there is a form in there. If you have got any specific question, a specific project, I would encourage anybody to just put it in there, so that with your question in there, a specific question, and then our team can take a look at it and then connect you to the necessary experts in API. I see Adrian has another question. Did you want to ask that, Adrian, before we move on to a question from Jas?
Let's let Jas go first. I could ask questions all day. So let's.
Awesome. Cool. Jas, do you want to ask the question? He's asking about the SAMD pathway, software as a medical device pathway. He's curious if it is better defined and established in the US than in Canada.
That's a good question. I think the Americans might have a little more experience with it. Yeah. But I think it's maturing because I think there's a greater understanding of the role of the software, the role of AI, and there is starting to be a little more literature out there about what information you need to capture, as I was talking about adverse events. The FDA has guidance, yes. So it's I think it's it's an important and growing part. I think it's probably kind of still up for debate and conversation.
I mean, I think with a lot of these areas, and as the regulations get developed, I mean, there is the ICH, the harmonization they're trying to do, right? So regulators are trying to learn and talk to other regulators as well, so they're not repeating the work to an extent. There's always going to be nuances and differences between the different regulators in different countries, like FDA versus Health Canada. But yes, as Michael said, there are guidelines and whatnot being introduced by the FDA. And will it adopt it word for word, or will it be a modification of that? Those are the type of things that we'll see over time.
And of course it's a guidance, right?
Correct.
It's a starting point of conversation. The FDA is full of a lot of statisticians. I think it has more statisticians than any regulator in the world. So invariably, they will always want data. They will always want quantitative data. They're not very happy with qualitative data and survey stuff. They like numbers. So they're always going to push towards something that they can. That's why we're seeing a lot more of this adverse event reporting and all this stuff on software. I still have a hard time understanding how you can, as a vendor, capture and have a liability for capturing information on someone using your software, who knows where, that happens to them. How you could link your software to them breaking their leg. I just don't understand how you'd be able to do that. But
right, there are so Sumrita has also posted things about the software as a medical device. Thanks for that. Adrian, did you want to ask your question straight?
Sure. So maybe I'll skip my question on formulary and insurance. I'll skip to diagnostics. We have a number of companies in the summit, and actually some attendees here, who are developing diagnostic tests, but we also have some other companies that are developing AI for diagnostics. And I'm curious the differences there, and how you de-risk a diagnostic pathway. Because I imagine that's not, sometimes it might be like the medical device, but I'm guessing there's a whole different class of regulatory requirements there.
yeah, I have to say, I haven't done a lot of those. I can tell you that ultimately the biggest issue always comes up is, what's the gold standard? What are you comparing to? If someone has to agree on what the gold standard is.
So just to add to that, Michael, so what's interesting is when you look at the clinical studies requirement for an IVD versus, say, a drug or whatnot, what's interesting is you're comparing your IVD to an established assay, as an example. Like the lab, if you sent the sample to a lab versus if you're using the IVD, right? So there's actually a data, again going back to data, that needs to prove that this IVD can be just as accurate as the kind of the more of the laboratory set assay. So what we've done for clients is we've helped them kind of do the test in the lab, compare it to the what the readings are getting on their IVD, and saying how close is that, right? And is it a different population? So for example, when you're doing like your statistics, and Michael, you can probably comment on this better than me, but is there does the blood type matter?
Precision, accuracy.
Like is it if it's saliva versus blood, is that better or worse? Like there's certain questions that come up when you're looking at your how your IVD works and how you're able to get we're talking, I guess, quantitative, right? And how accurate would that be, and how do you prove that accuracy and reproducibility of that accuracy with an IVD versus, for example, a known and established and validated method that's out there. So we do work with different organizations like blood draw organizations that help have samples and be able to compare human samples and look at the IVD versus that laboratory method. So those are kind of some high level stuff, but there again is data that's required to prove the statistical analysis of it, to say that this IVD will do or measure what it's supposed to, because you don't want any false positives or anything like that, and that type of thing, that would lead to an AE, as Michael was talking about earlier. So it's definitely a different type of clinical study, but it's obviously still generating data, and it takes a lot of thought to make sure that you have statistically enough data points to get the approval through it would be through the medical device channel. It is IVD and medical devices go hand in hand in terms of the license application, but it is and it's based on risk, again, 1 to 4. So it looks at what is your IVD measuring? Is it a life a life dependency type of thing at a high risk level 4, or is it something like that's not really any real what I mean? So there's definitions, and I'm happy to share the Health Canada guidance on that, but it talks about the different risks of the IVDs related to what you're measuring.
But if I understand correctly, then someone who's developed a new test for a lab, that would be considered a medical device pathway, and someone who's got a new algorithm, AI algorithm, is taking existing data and diagnosing, that would also be medical device pathway, but software is medical device. Is that so? It's actually the same pathway for those two things. Okay,
and for both of those, the biggest risk you have is actually trying to sell it to somebody, because really you only have institutional payers. And what I've seen is that internal labs will buy it, and then they will replicate it and bring it in-house and stop buying your product. And there's nothing to stop them from doing that.
Patent protection, I would assume, protected to some
Well, so I have a very example in mind where a vendor was giving an assay for a specific bug, and that vendor increased the cost of the assay, and the kit. So the lab developed its own assay, very similar to what the vendor had done. Those are unregulated by Health Canada. They are reviewed, they are established by accreditation, but they are controlled within the lab themselves. And then they started using that for basically all the testing that they were using the vendor for before.
Okay.
So there's a lot of risk with those, yeah.
But you have to sue under the patent law.
Yeah, you're going to have to do that, but the assays from one to the other can be just subtly different.
The key is with a process or product patent, what is called out there, and is there, as Michael said, is there enough of a difference that it would not be considered infringing? And that's the I hate to say it, but it's the case you have to make, that you're pretty solidified saying no, they followed it line by line. They wouldn't have had the knowledge to do this without the patent, which is public, right? And so they are infringing. So that
yeah. But at the same time, do you want to you want to burn maybe a large hospital system that will be your client in the future, so yeah. Yeah, assays. I was always very surprised, because I find a lot of people doing in-house assays, even for ones that are in the product monograph. You shall use X assay before you use this drug, and then somebody shows up and says, "Oh no, we're using our own," and it was like, oh, like really, and it's and like how'd you go after them? It's very hard.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if I'm seeing that there's 5 minutes to the clock, so I was going to hand it over to you, Adrian.
Well, honestly, I have another question, but I mean, if we could get some questions from the crowd, that'd be great.
Sure.
If no one's got anything, though, I can ask my insurance question.
Sure.
Okay. So I have a pretty good understanding of the process for getting a drug or device, or not necessarily a device, but a test covered by the provincial formula or on the provincial formulary, and then covered by our health system. What is the process in the US for getting your drug or device covered by an insurer?
So it's even more complex because you have let's say Assure, an insurance plan, or a Kaiser Permanente system in the United States. You have a middle body, which are sort of the pharmacy benefits managers. Those do negotiations for drug companies, for basically for buying everything, as an intermediary for insurance companies and hospital systems. And they make money by basically getting a discount from you, and then taking a percentage of that and setting, connecting you with the other payers. So there's people who pay inside. The biggest one that in the United States, of course, is Medicaid. And getting on that formulary is very similar to the Canadian process. They are looking for, they do an evaluation of the product from a cost effectiveness, clinical effectiveness. But they also have significant negotiations with regards to price. They do a lot of restrictions. They do a lot of guidelines and tiering of the products. But yeah, it's a complex process. Also, the pharmacies have a lot of role, like Walgreens, Walmart have a significant role in the market, and they can really dictate some require significant cost reductions. Like Walmart and Walgreens have a series of drugs that they only sell for $1. So of course they're getting it for less than $1, right? So market pressures. Generic drug prices in the United States are actually lower than Canada. So they have a really big difference between.
Yeah, that intermediary body, I didn't know about that. That's really interesting. So
yeah, they are they're like we have here called Health Pro, which is a purchaser just for hospital systems in Canada. So they have something like that, but they have regional ones all over the place, because insurance companies in the United States cannot be national. They can only be state level. So you can't have one insurance company for the entire country. They are every state. They have to have a separate. So then there's these regional buying groups.
So to that extent, that's similar to Canada, because we have provincial.
Yeah, so it has a Canadian feel to it. Yes.
Lastly, before we wrap up, we do have at least one veterinary or ag tech company here at a very high level, because it's probably not enough time. What are the sort of, because I know it's different acts for veterinary products than it is for Health Canada. Are there sort of some high level things to pay attention to when we're de-risking veterinary products? Are there just gross similarities? Can you maybe speak to some of that at a high level in the one?
I haven't done veterinary in a very long time. Richard,
Same.
Yeah.
I mean, there are. What did I provided you something on that, Paramita, a little while ago around the veterinary products.
I know there's no cost controls. You could sell it for as much as you want.
I'm happy to provide some information post this session, but yeah, like off the top of my head, I don't want to relay without that in front of me. So
yeah, no, I agree. I'm
okay, that's fine. And so then actually, Neil, if you can, is Neil gone? Neil may have had to leave early. Sorry. We'll follow up with any of our veterinary or ag tech companies in that space and maybe connect you, connect and get some questions from them. With that, I think we're at the top of the hour here. I don't know. It's a complicated space, and thank you so much for the presentation. I think it's been very valuable. We're going to share the recording with the companies who couldn't make it today. Obviously, middle of the day is people have conflicts. But no, this has been super valuable. So thanks a lot for putting this together. Any closing comments from you, Paramita?
No, I think one of the most important things is that there are always going to be questions, and we are here to help you. So again, if there's anything that is a burning question, please feel free to connect with any of us or send an email through that API link that Marina shared in the chat. And thank you, Adrian, Neil, and the rest of Gloria and the rest of the Startup TNT team for giving us this opportunity to present.
No, absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys. That was great.
Thanks so much.